In today's video, we're gonna make this sick boomerang. What the heck is going on with my enemy? He got up on top of that. Okay, well, we're gonna make a boomerang, so stay tuned and hope you enjoy the video. Hi, my name is Michael, and welcome to my 2D action and adventure RPG tutorial series. We are learning how to build a top-down 2D game that features action, adventure, and light RPG mechanics all in Godot 4 using GDScript. First thing I want to address is actually a little bit of cleanup. So someone pointed out in our Discord community, which you can find linked in the description below, that there's a bug here with our enemy. Let me try this again. Let me run it one more time. I got to do it. You got to do it just right. If you kill this goblin enemy when he's not looking at you, then he doesn't die correctly. Now he's just going to chase me forever, and he's in his bright red state because he was supposed to die. So that's actually a pretty straightforward fix. And what we're going to do is go over to our scripts for the enemy chase state, or enemy underscore state underscore chase. So in this script, we connect to the vision area, and whenever the player enters, we call this on player enter. And what's happening in that bug is you kill the enemy, but he faces you because that's the knockback direction. He's going to face the player and then get knocked away from him. And so what happens is the player enters the vision cone, and that instantly triggers this, and then it's like, oh, I can see the player, so now I'm going to change. I'm going to make this the new state. We just don't want to have that happen, and we already prevented it from happening when the enemy enters the stun state. We just need to update this to include the destroy state. So what we can do is just, for our if statement here, I'm going to make a parenthesis, and actually, hold on, get this colon down here, make another parenthesis to close it, and we're going to put multiple conditions in here. So if the state machine current state is enemy stun state, right? I'm going to go ahead and copy that, and then we'll put an or. It doesn't matter, I don't think, which line you put it on. I'll put it right here. Or the state machine current state is enemy destroy state. Enemy state destroy. There we go. So now if I run this and go ahead and see if I can kill this guy quick enough. There we go. Still destroyed. So quick fix to that little issue. And then if there's any other bugs of a similar type here, you can always add them to this condition. Okay, now that we've got that issue fixed, let's go ahead and start creating our boomerang. So I'm going to find my player folder. And first thing I want to do is open the sprite folder. So I'm going to open this in the file manager. And then I also want to download this new asset for the boomerang, and you can get that on the itch.io page, or you can use your own. So I'm just going to go ahead and just plop that in here into my sprites in my player folder. There we go. Now we've got a boomerang sprite. And let's go ahead, just do a couple things here. We're going to need some scripts for this, and I'm going to go ahead and create a folder underneath the player scripts folder, and I'm going to call it abilities, so that we've just got some organization. And I'm going to go ahead and add a script here that we'll call boomerang. And in the player folder, let's create a new scene that we will also call boomerang. And there we go. We've got a boomerang scene open, and we've got a script. I'm going to go ahead and take this boomerang ability script, just drag it on here. Now let's set up the boomerang. It's going to be pretty straightforward. We basically need a sprite and maybe an area so it can detect things, and we're going to have an animation player, and then we can add some additional items later. But let's go ahead and add the sprite 2D node and go ahead and find our boomerang sprite and plop that guy on there. Now let's see, this is 8 frames, so if I go down to animation, horizontal frame should be 8, and there we go, got our little boomerang. I'm going to do one thing. I don't want the boomerang I want it to be kind of sitting, oops, hit W, so I'm on the move tool. I want it to be sitting kind of above the origin, so I'm going to drag it up like that. Now let's go ahead, like I mentioned, we're probably going to want an area 2D, so let's add that. I'm going to go ahead and add the collision shape 2D that we need underneath there, and make it a circle shape. And I believe this is going to need to be about 13 pixels. I'll just grab my area 2D and drag that up as well, so that it's kind of centered right there on the boomerang. That looks good. I'm going to turn monitorable off. And I'm going to add one more thing. Let's add an animation player. And let's make a new animation. We'll just call it boomerang. Everything's going to be called boomerang. Okay. Now this animation is going to be pretty straightforward. All we really want to do with this boomerang is just have it be able to spin as it's flying through the air. And so we'll just simply select our sprite 2D. Let's key the frame. Boink. Create that. There we go. Do I need one more? Yeah, I think so. Now, one thing I want to do is I want to make it so that this plays fairly quickly. And so, okay, we could actually transform this. Yeah, maybe we do that. Let's go edit, scale selection, 0.375. Boink. And then the duration of this is going to be 0.3 seconds, and it should be looping. And there we go. Boomerang animation. Pretty straightforward. Go ahead and put my area underneath it so we can see that boomerang nicely. There we go. We've got a simple animation. I'm going to go ahead and go to our reset animation. Yeah, that looks good. Okay. Let's go back to boomerang. Let's select this and set it to autoplay on load so that that's the animation that it plays by default. And then let's go into our boomerang script. So our boomerang script, let's go ahead and give it a class name. What we want this boomerang to do is whatever direction the player is facing when we throw it, it should fly in that direction until it hits its apex, and then it's going to return back to the player. And what that means is if the player is moving, then the boomerang needs to track the player as well. And there's probably a few ways we could do this and implement this, and a few different ways we could make this function. How I've decided to do it is that the boomerang will throw in a straight line from where the player throws it. And then once it hits its apex, then it will start tracking the player. So if the player's moving when he first throws it, it'll go in a straight line and then it'll come to the player. That way it makes it a little bit easier, I think, for the player to know where they're going to be throwing the boomerang. And so we'll go ahead and this should extend Node 2D. Let's go ahead and set that up then. So we're going to make a really, really basic state machine. So we're going to create an enumerable type of variable here, and we're just going to give it I guess we'll need 3 states, I think: inactive, throw, or return. And we're actually probably not going to use that inactive state much. It's not really going to do much, but we'll kind of utilize it. The boomerang, we want it to be able to track the player because obviously we want it to be able to return to the player. So we'll create a variable that will hold a reference to the player. We also want a direction, which is going to be obviously the direction that the boomerang is flying in. Okay. It's going to need a speed. And this is not like the max speed or whatever. This is going to be the current speed that it's moving. So I'm going to just set that to 0 by default. And then we want a variable to keep track of the current state. We can just call it state with lowercase. You could call it current state. And then I didn't give that a type because it doesn't work so well with enumerables. If I were to go like this, we'd probably end up getting an error. But we do want to export a few variables as well. So let's export a variable for the acceleration. Oops, I need to put variable first. Acceleration. And this will be a float. I'm going to set this equal to, see, I kind of cheated. I already found good values when I was prepping for this. So you can pick a different value if you want and play around with it. And I realize that's kind of one of the maybe weak points of my videos so far. So I'm trying to figure out a better way to do this, not have it so planned maybe, but the max speed is another export variable we want. And this is the one we're going to use to control the speed. And we're going to give this, it's going to be a float. We're going to set it equal to 400. And you can play around with these a little bit. I tried values of max speed all the way from 200 all the way up to 1500, I think it was. And it worked pretty good. You do need to adjust the acceleration in accordance because otherwise the boomerang could go a really far distance before it starts returning. Let's see. One last thing we need to do to set this up is just grab a reference. I'm going to click and drag it while holding control. Drop that in there. We've got our animation player, so that we can set the animation in case we need to. I don't know that we'll need to, but so there we go. Basic script set up with all the variables and settings that we'll need to control this. So if we select our boomerang, we can see our acceleration and max speed. So you can play around with those if you want to get a different feel from yours. Now let's go ahead and do our ready function. And what we're going to do here is I'm going to just set this visible to false real quick, just in case, because when we spawn this boomerang, we're going to have to like reposition it and stuff. And so I think this may or may not be necessary, but whatever. I just did that to make sure it doesn't appear in an odd spot. We're going to set its state also to inactive so that it's not doing anything. And then we're going to, whenever it's created, we're going to find the player and store that. And fortunately in this project, we've already got a handy way to get our player. So we'll just go to the player manager.player. There we go. Now we've got a reference to our player when we need it. Now this boomerang will do all of the updates in the physics process for the movement. So let's go ahead and just add our physics process function here. And then we're going to need one other function. And this is the function that we will call throw, which we will call when we want to invoke or begin the throw state of the boomerang. And we're also going to make this function require one argument, which is the throw direction. So we know which direction to set the boomerang initially. And that can return void. Okay, there we go. So we've got just some basic functions in here. And let's just go ahead and set up the code for these. So this is kind of a weird way to do it, because you're probably thinking like, we don't even have a boomerang in the scene, right? How is this doing anything? And that's a great question. But what we'll do is we'll build it, and I know that this code is tested, so it should work, and then we'll just plop it into place appropriately. So we're going to say that the direction here, remember this is one of the new variables we created, the direction will equal the throw direction. Okay, whatever direction we pass in. We're going to set the speed initially to the max speed. So what that means is as soon as the player throws the boomerang, it's going to be moving at its max speed. Okay. Then we will set the state to throw. So we go state equals state.throw, just like that. And then we are going to just grab our animation player and tell it to play the boomerang animation. Boomerang. And we'll make it visible. So as you notice, some of these lines of code might be a little bit redundant. I think sometimes I play it a little bit too safe and make sure I just set all the things, even if they're not necessary, but there we go. So when we throw the boomerang, that's what it's going to do. So there's two states in the physics process that we need to handle, right? If we look at our states, we've got inactive, throw, and return. So let's go ahead and just make an if statement here. We'll just say if state equals two equal signs, state.throw. Okay, that would be the initial state after the player throws it. Then we'll do something here. Or we'll also check if it's not that state, then we'll say elif state equals state.return. So if it's returning, we'll do something slightly different. So the first thing that we're going to do is how the boomerang works, right? When a player or when a person throws a boomerang, it goes out and then it slowly slows down and then returns back to the thrower. At least if you know how to throw a boomerang. I've tried throwing boomerangs in real life and it doesn't do the cool boomerang thing. So I don't know, I don't have that skill, but our character does in this game. So we'll go ahead and what we're going to do to get that effect is we're just going to take our speed and we're going to continually decrease that speed. So we're going to decrease it by our acceleration amount or value, whatever we've set that to, and multiply that by the delta, right? So in our physics process, the delta is the amount of time that's passed since the previous frame, and then that allows it to not be frame dependent. So even if you have a fast frame rate or a slow frame rate, this change will be the same. And then we're going to simply change the position. And you'll notice we're just using a plus equals. We're just using a regular node 2D for this instead of like a character body or something like that. That's because I don't think we need most of the extra bells and whistles that are given by some of those other nodes, but you could use those if you wanted to. So we're just going to change our position by the direction, multiplied by the speed, multiplied by the delta. Okay. Yeah. So again, we use the delta just to make sure that it's not frame independent. And what this will do is it'll slowly slow down till it stops. And actually what I want to do right now is I want to just leave this code as is. We're not going to handle the return state or how to get there. Let's go ahead and save this. And we'll start adding a boomerang to our player. Okay, so now that we've got this far with our boomerang, I want to set up a way for our player to throw it. And I went back and forth on this, and I hope I made a good choice and I don't regret this later, but we could make like a player state in the state machine for throwing a boomerang. I think that there are other abilities that would be similar to a boomerang, and I'd kind of like them to be handled by the same code if possible, because it's somewhat simple. And I also don't think that we need a complete state for throwing a boomerang, because I feel like the player should be able to throw a boomerang just about any time. And in fact, how we build it right now, the player is going to be able to throw a boomerang no matter what state they're in. And then we could add simple conditions in there to prevent him from throwing it when he's stunned, or maybe doing some other, in some other state that should block the ability. But otherwise, even if you're attacking or walking or standing still, you can just press a button to throw a boomerang. So let's do a couple things here. Let's go and set up our input map. And what do we have? I'm going to collapse up, down, left, right. We've got attack on Z. We've got interact on S. You can choose where you want to put this, but I'm just going to call this action. Yeah, I think that's okay. Actually, no, I changed my mind. I want it to be called ability. See how quick I did that? Okay. Ability right here. And we're just going to bind a key. And I'm going to go ahead and on the keyboard, I'm going to use the X key, squeaky chair. Then on the joypad, we've already got square for interact. So I think for the ability on my joypad, I'm going to use triangle. I mean, it doesn't really matter, right? You could change it if you don't like how I set it up. I'm not sure that I love it, but that's okay. So there we go. So triangle or X, that's our ability button now. Okay, so we've got a way to detect that. In our player, we're going to add a node, just a regular old node with the white circle. I'm going to call this abilities. And this is just going to be a node that I can plop a script onto right now. I have ideas how we might put things underneath it, but for now, that's all it is. So I'm just going to simply go down to my file system in the abilities, scripts abilities folder for my player. I'm going to create a new script and call it abilities and plop that guy right on there and open it up. So what this script is going to do is just kind of do some of the input detection, and then also maybe keep track of what abilities we have and kick them off or start them when the button is pressed. So I'm going to give it a class name of, I'm going to call it player abilities, just in case I have some other type in the future. It extends node, that's fine. So let's do this. We haven't instantiated the boomerang anywhere. We haven't placed it in a scene. And so what I want to do is we're going to instantiate them on the fly. So we'll have a constant called boomerang. It's funny that it wants to tell me boomerang, but I want it all caps. And we'll just preload the boomerang scene. And if I start typing boomerang, there we go. So boomerang, just preload that scene. We want an enum. This may not be super necessary. I'm kind of thinking ahead of where we're going to get in this tutorial, but we've got a couple abilities that we might have, right? So boomerang is the one we are building. And then, I don't know, for lack of anything else, we'll just say wand or something, or actually maybe it would be like grapple. That'd be cool, like a grappling hook. Let's go here and set up other variables that we're going to need. So we're going to have a variable for the selected ability. And we'll just set it already to the boomerang. So by default, it'll be set to boomerang. Okay, so we've got that. Let's say another variable. We do want to track our player. we're going to need to be able to get some information from him. And we are going to want to keep track of one other thing, and that's our boomerang instance of type boomerang. And by default, I'm going to set that to null. Okay, so those are the variables we're going to need. And so I'm going to go ahead and set up some functions in here. So like I mentioned, this is going to handle inputs. So anytime we have an unhandled input, we're going to do something, see if we need to. And then we'll also have a simple function. Well, this is probably the least simple function we'll make today, but it's not too bad. And it's just going to be the boomerang. We'll call it boomerang ability. Okay, so we can just call this anytime we need to throw the boomerang. And in our unhandled input function here, we're going to do this. So if event is action pressed, And then we'll just say ability, right? That new action we created. So if it's that, then we'll do a check, and we'll just, what we're going to do here is based on the selected ability. So I envision that in our game, there's a system to be able to change which ability is selected. And right now, obviously, it's essentially hard-coded to be the boomerang ability. But at least this is somewhat forward thinking. So if that's the ability, then let's do the boomerang ability. And there's no check here built in about the player state or anything, but we can always add that later. Okay, so let's go ahead and set up our boomerang ability. So in this boomerang ability, we're going to, let's see, actually real quick, let's do one more thing. Let's make a ready function, or let's set up the ready function. And we're going to do one simple thing here, and we're just going to get a reference to our player. Just player manager dot player. Okay, there we go. There, now we have a reference to the player because we're going to need that down below. So in our boomerang ability, now that we've got our player, we'll just say this. We're going to create a new boomerang, and I'm just going to call it _b. So this is going to equal a boomerang.instantiate. Right? Just create a new instance of that, and I'm going to make sure to say as boomerang, just so that my code knows what class and what type of node that inherits. And then we're going to say player dot add sibling. So what this will do is it'll when it after we instantiate it, we'll put the boomerang as a sibling of the player, which means the parent node of the boomerang will be whatever level the player's in. Okay, that'll be important for the z-index stacking. And then we're going to set our boomerang's global position, I guess, equal to the player's global position. All right, just get it positioned. And so we'll create a new variable here. So we'll just say throw direction. And first we're going to set it equal to the player direction. And the player direction is determined based on whatever direction you're pressing on the input or your keyboard or your controller, right? So we'll try that. We'll say throw direction is player.direction. Okay. But that could be just zeros, right? Like the player could be not pressing any direction. So we'll just do a quick check. And if that's the case, if throw direction equals two equal signs, vector2.0, we know that the player's not pressing anything. Then we'll just set the throw direction equal to the player dot. We've got this cardinal direction, and that's always going to be set to something. So there we go. So now it'll be facing whatever direction they're pressing, if they're pressing a direction, which could be diagonal, or it's going to be one of the cardinal directions. So if the player's idle, it'll just throw it whichever way he's facing. And then, well, let's see, there's probably two more things we need to do. So first we're going to grab our boomerang. It's B, and we're going to call the throw function. And we'll just pass the throw direction in there. And then lastly, we're going to set our boomerang instance equal to this B. There we go. Because remember, we're keeping track of that boomerang instance. So, okay, we just did a lot of stuff without testing anything. So in our player, we've got this abilities, we've got a script. I don't know, I'm pretty confident it's going to work though. So let's go ahead and give it a try and see what happens here. There we go. And you can see I can just keep throwing boomerangs, and they'll go whichever way I'm facing when I'm running diagonal. Kind of cool. Now, obviously, we don't want infinite boomerangs, or at least I don't. If you do want a game where you've got infinite boomerangs, just keep in mind that these things are sitting in memory. So you're going to want some way to eventually have them destroy, like maybe when they leave the screen or after a certain amount of time, something like that. And you could build that into the boomerang script. And in fact, we will build a destroy statement into the boomerang here. And we'll get to that in just a little bit. But, you know, depending on how you implement your boomerang, if it's a different way than I do, then just keep that in account. You don't want to end up with, you know, the person's been playing the game for an hour and there's like a million boomerangs and starts to get sluggish or something weird like that. Okay, so the player can throw boomerangs. Let's take it one step further and make it so they can only throw one boomerang. And that's going to be pretty easy because we're tracking the instance of the boomerang. So what we'll simply do is under boomerang ability, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to check if boomerang instance does not equal null. Okay, that means that's the same as saying, do we have a boomerang? And if we do, then we're just going to return Now if I run the game, I'll only be able to throw one boomerang. And that's all I'm ever going to be able to throw until we get a little bit further, right? Because that boomerang, like I mentioned, it's still like flying off into the expanses of the universe or something. So boomerang instance, boomerang, oh my gosh. We need a new name for boomerang that's easier for me to say. So if it's null, we'll do that. So let's go ahead and go back to our boomerang. And in order for this boomerang to kind of come full circle, yeah, that's what a boomerang does. We need to finish this out, right? That was not planned. It was just pure charisma, you guys. Here's what we want to do. In our boomerang script, we've already handled if the state is throwing. And what happens is we've got this situation where, because we're constantly decreasing the acceleration, eventually the acceleration or the speed gets to 0, and then it starts going negative and it starts going in the opposite direction, right? We don't actually want that, because we want it, if you recall, we want the boomerang to start tracking the player after it reaches its apex. So we'll put an if statement in here, and if speed is less than or equal to 0, then we're going to change the state to equal the state dot return. Okay, so then suddenly now it's going to be kicked into this other state down here. And what we'll do with this one is we're going to calculate a direction each time. So the direction is no longer going to be whatever was set when we call the throw function. Now it's going to be dynamic, and we're going to do this. We're going to get the global position of the boomerang, and then we'll get direction 2. And then what this does is it wants us to pass in another vector 2, as you can see with the little hint there. And so we'll get, let's see, player dot global position. Okay, so since we've already got a reference to the player, we'll just say what's the direction to that guy's direction. And then we can go ahead and, instead of decreasing the speed, we're going to swap it. Because if we kept it being subtracting, then it would just continue moving away from the player. But what we want it to do is to start increasing its speed again. So we'll do plus equals, and we'll continue to use that acceleration value, multiply it by the delta. Okay. And then next is we'll do a similar thing where we'll just adjust the position. And now we could almost make this outside of the if statement, but because this line is going to be repeated, actually, I could just copy this line and paste it. I'm going to leave that even though it's a repeat of a line, because it's only one, and I don't want to think about it too hard right now. It seems fine. And then what we'll do is we're going to do one more check, and that's, let's see, what's this? Global. What we want to do is see when the boomerang returns to the player, right? So once the global position dot distance to, once the distance to the player, we'll get the player's global position, is within a certain range. Now this gives us a float, okay? This distance to it takes 2 vector 2s, and it gives us a float. So we can just use a number like that, 10 units. So if it's less than 10 units from the player, then we'll just say, okay, it returned to the player caught it. And what we'll do here is we will queue free this node. So it's just going to disappear. And that's how we're going to make sure that there aren't infinite boomerangs out there. And what this will do is, because it frees here, then back in our ability, this reference to the boomerang, once it's freed, it's going to become null again. So we should be able to throw another boomerang once the player catches it. So let's see, let's start. Boink. And you see that it's like following the player, right? Pretty cool. And it goes about that far. Now, if you want the boomerang to travel further, you could do it by adjusting the speed, the maximum speed, and or the acceleration, okay? And you may need to adjust both to get the fill and the distance that you want. There's probably other ways you could do this. You could probably say, like, do it over distance or something, but this was just the implementation I decided on. So there you go. We've got a simple boomerang, and we can throw it, and it comes back to the player. So we've made pretty good progress. The only downside is obviously, like, I'm stunned. Let's see if I can get stunned and throw it. I could throw it while I'm stunned. I don't know. You may or may not want that. I mean, I don't want that, but for now, this is a good start. Now, the last thing I'd like to do right now with our boomerang is actually to make it so that we can damage the enemy with it. And that's going to be pretty straightforward. So let's just go here to our boomerang and do a Shift Control A. And let's see, we want a HurtBox. So I'm going to just add an instance of that HurtBox scene. And I'm actually going to go into my area 2D. I'm going to duplicate that collision shape. Now this collision shape is going to have the same, it's going to have the same whatever shape as the other one, which is okay because I think they should be the same. If you wanted those to be distinct, you could come down here and say make unique. Okay, in fact, let's just do that just for fun. Make unique. Now if I adjust this circle shape bigger or smaller, you can see that it's got a different radius, right? I'm gonna go back to 13. Okay, so we've got a HurtBox on here. Because this HurtBox is on the player, let's see, do we need to adjust the collision? I think we do, because by default the HurtBox is looking on the player hurt. Yep, so let's deselect that layer mask and we'll turn on the enemy one, which is layer 9, and we'll make it do 1 damage. That's fine. I'm just going to go ahead and run the game. So now our boomerang, in addition to being awesome, should also kill the enemy, which I'm not going to lie, that feels pretty dang awesome. Let's go. Oh man, where's some slimes? Let's go find some slimes. And this is kind of fun. Let's see if we can get it on the return. Boom. Got him. And theoretically, our slimes have multiple health. I don't know why our goblin is weaker than our slime, but it is what it is. There we go. We hit that slime twice with the same boomerang. Nice, nice, nice. Oh, look at the skill of that boomerang. Diagonal shot. So there we go. We've got a working boomerang. It can kill enemies. It's super fun. A couple things lacking from the boomerang. And these are things that we're going to address in the next video. One is we don't have the ability, or we don't limit the use of the boomerang, right? You can just always use it. Another thing that we are lacking is the ability to toggle between different abilities. We're not going to address that in the near future because we're going to need another ability before we can. At least another ability that would be bound to the same key. Another thing missing from this boomerang is some of that sweet game juice that I'd mentioned and don't do tons of, but so we're going to have some sound effects and things like that in the future. And we'll do that actually in the next video. So if you appreciated this one, if you're enjoying this content and continuing to learn, then please give me a thumbs up. Subscribe to my channel if you want to watch the next one when it comes out. And as always, thank you for watching. Okay, now I suck. Now I suck with the boomerang. I don't get it.